It was late on the night of April 26, 2005, when Raven Abaroa stepped back into the quiet Durham, North Carolina townhouse he shared with his young wife, Janet. But when he opened the front door that evening, he walked into a scene straight out of a nightmare, one that would haunt investigators, reporters, and an entire community for years to come. According to the 911 call placed just minutes later, Raven was frantic. The operator tried to coax more details from him, but Raven seemed either unable or unwilling to give a clear answer. He spoke in circles. First responders arrived within minutes. What they found inside that townhouse was nothing short of devastating. Paramedics tried briefly to resuscitate her, but it was already too late. Janet Abaroa was born on June 19, 1979, in a quiet and picturesque town nestled in the rolling hills of Virginia. She was part of a large and deeply religious family, an environment that greatly shaped her values, behavior, and life choices from a very young age. Janet was the seventh child out of 10 siblings, and from early on, she stood out as a remarkably bright and compassionate individual. Her family belonged to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, often referred to as the Mormon faith. The principles of this faith were not just practiced passively, they were actively lived out in the Abaroa household. Religion played a central and guiding role in the upbringing of all the children, including Janet. From childhood, Janet displayed qualities that would later define her as a person. She was strong-willed, highly independent, deeply empathetic, and intellectually sharp. Those who knew her often said she possessed a warm, yet quietly assertive demeanor. She was not only academically capable, but also physically active and competitive. Her love for sports was more than just a hobby, it was a passion. In middle school, she played soccer and basketball, and she also excelled in swimming. Her athletic abilities continued to shine through her teenage years, and she played for her high school teams with great commitment and skill. Later, she continued her athletic career at the collegiate level, playing soccer at Southern Virginia University, a private liberal arts school aligned with her religious beliefs. It was during one of these college soccer matches in 1998 that Janet first met Raven Abaroa, a fellow student athlete. Raven was a talented soccer player, charming and confident, and their paths crossed both on and off the field. What began as a shared interest in sports soon blossomed into a deeper romantic connection. They started dating, and over time their bond grew stronger. After several years of courtship, the two decided to marry. In August of 2000, Janet and Raven were wed in a sacred ceremony held at the Mormon Temple in Washington, D.C., a meaningful location for them as devoted members of their faith. In the beginning, the newlyweds seemed to be a promising and happy couple. They were young, energetic, and full of hope for their future together. They shared similar religious values and both wanted to build a large, loving family. However, the challenges of marriage soon began to test their relationship. Within the first year, Janet began to experience difficulties that weighed heavily on her emotionally. She confided in her close friends and family members about the turbulence in her home life. According to those closest to her, Janet had discovered that Raven was not being faithful. She suspected, and later learned, that he had been seeing other women behind her back. There were instances when Raven left their home for days without providing any clear explanation, only to return as if nothing had happened. These events left Janet heartbroken and confused. She was a woman who dreamed of a stable family life, one filled with trust, loyalty, and children. She had always imagined herself as a nurturing mother within a supportive and honest partnership. The reality she was living, however, was far from what she had envisioned. Despite all of this, Janet found herself in a deeply conflicted emotional space. She still loved her husband, and her faith emphasized the importance of family unity and forgiveness. To make matters more complex, it was during this stormy period in their marriage that Janet discovered she was pregnant. The news, which should have brought pure joy, instead became a source of anxiety and sadness. She longed to be a mother. There was no question about that, but she feared doing it alone. The thought of raising a child while facing betrayal and instability in her marriage filled her with dread. She was torn between her love for Raven and the hard truths she could no longer ignore. Nevertheless, she made the decision to move forward, hoping that motherhood would bring clarity and perhaps even strengthen their fractured relationship. On October 17, 2004, Janet gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, whom she named Caden. From the moment he entered the world, her entire focus shifted. Janet poured every ounce of her energy, love, and attention into her son. She strived to be the best mother she could possibly be, even as her household struggled to stay financially and emotionally afloat. The family was living on a single income, Raven's. He worked as a salesman, but his earnings were far from sufficient to support a growing family. With Janet now a full-time mother, the loss of her income created a significant strain on their household budget. Fortunately, their landlord was understanding and offered them a 3-month grace period on their rent, showing compassion for their situation. The couple also turned to their local Mormon congregation for help. The church community provided them with some financial relief, ensuring they could afford basic needs for themselves and their infant son. Despite this support, the family's financial instability persisted. Then, in December 2004, a new and serious problem arose that added to their already heavy burdens. Raven was arrested on charges related to theft. It was discovered that he had stolen several items, mainly athletic apparel, from the sporting goods store where both he and Janet were employed. He had attempted to sell the stolen merchandise online, an act that ultimately led to his arrest. Raven was ordered to pay restitution totaling $15,000 to the store and was sentenced to 2 years of probation. The consequences of his actions were devastating. Not only did both Janet and Raven lose their jobs, but Raven's newly acquired criminal record made it nearly impossible for him to find new employment. The couple found themselves unemployed, without income, and responsible for a newborn. Despite these tremendous challenges, Janet refused to give up. She and Raven did their best to pick up the pieces of their life. They took on temporary jobs, accepted financial and emotional help from their families, and tried to keep their relationship from falling apart entirely. Still, under the surface, unresolved tensions and mistrust lingered. On April 26, 2005, the day began like many others. Janet picked up baby Caden from his daycare and returned home to prepare dinner. That evening, Raven joined them. The small family had dinner together in what appeared to be a quiet domestic routine. Later that night, once Janet and Caden had gone to bed, Raven claimed he drove to Morrisville to participate in an indoor soccer game, one of the few recreational outlets he still enjoyed. But when he returned home late that night, he encountered a horrifying scene that would change everything. Raven Abaroa, clearly in shock and disbelief over what he had found, immediately dialed 911. His voice on the emergency call, later reviewed by investigators, carried a mix of panic and confusion. He informed the dispatcher that his wife had been attacked and was unresponsive, but he couldn't explain exactly what had been done to her. He appeared unable, or perhaps unwilling, to articulate the severity of what he had seen. When first responders arrived at the scene, they were met with a grim and tragic sight. Paramedics quickly assessed the situation and determined that Janet Abaroa had not been harmed by a firearm, as might have initially been assumed given Raven's vague report. There was nothing the emergency team could do. The scene was secured, and homicide detectives were immediately called in to take over. The investigators were stunned, not just by the loss of life, but by the sheer brutality and calculated nature of the attack. It was clear to everyone on scene that this had not been a spontaneous act or random incident. It was vicious, intimate, and personal. The immediate question on everyone's mind was the same. Who could carry out such a violent and targeted act against a woman who was known to be peaceful, loving, and well-liked by everyone who knew her? At the crime scene, investigators and forensic technicians collected a wide array of evidence. Blood patterns, fingerprints, potential DNA, and even a partial shoe print were all cataloged. On Janet's body and throughout the room where she was found, forensic experts carefully gathered materials that could help establish a timeline, reconstruct the events, and, most importantly, identify a suspect. Each piece of evidence was treated with the utmost care, knowing how critical they would be in piecing together the final moments of Janet's life. Meanwhile, law enforcement began canvassing the neighborhood, looking for possible witnesses. They asked neighbors if they had seen anything unusual that night, any unfamiliar vehicles, unfamiliar faces, or sounds of a disturbance. They also inquired about the couple's recent behavior, hoping to understand the household dynamics. But almost immediately, detectives began to focus their attention on someone very close to the victim, her husband, Raven Abaroa. As is standard in most cases of this nature, the spouse is often considered a person of interest, particularly when the crime occurs in a shared home and there are no signs of forced entry. Raven was invited to the station for a formal interview, and during multiple rounds of questioning, he provided a detailed account of his whereabouts on the night of the incident. According to his statement, he had returned home at around 8 p.m. and had dinner with Janet and their son. After dinner, he claimed that both Janet and Caden had gone to bed, and then he left the house to attend an indoor soccer game in Morrisville, a nearby town. He said he didn't return until approximately 10:40 p.m. Upon entering the home, Raven called out to his wife but received no response. That's when he went upstairs and, according to him, discovered her. When questioned about who he thought might have had a reason to harm Janet, Raven offered an unusual and unexpected theory. He suggested that perhaps the mounting financial stress the family had been under had overwhelmed his wife. He speculated, without evidence, that she may have harmed herself. He implied that she might not have been able to handle the pressures any longer. This suggestion was not only upsetting to those who knew Janet, it was also deeply inconsistent with what investigators were seeing. Family members and close friends were outraged by this theory. They categorically denied that Janet would have ever done anything to harm herself. According to them, she had never once expressed thoughts of that nature, even during the most trying times. She had a strong support system and had been candid about her marital issues, but she remained hopeful about the future. Importantly, Janet's faith played a significant role in how she viewed the sanctity of life. As a devout member of her church, she was deeply committed to her beliefs and would not have made such a choice. Furthermore, the physical evidence at the scene directly contradicted Raven's suggestion. Forensic investigators discovered a shoe print near the body, along with an unaccounted-for fingerprint. The pattern of the crime scene indicated that there had been no forced entry into the home. The doors and windows were all intact and locked, which strongly indicated that the perpetrator had either been invited into the home or had access to it already. This narrowed the field significantly. It was someone the victim knew and likely trusted. Even more suspicious was the list of items missing from the home. 2 kitchen knives from the set in the house were unaccounted for, one of which could have been the weapon used in the crime. Also missing was Raven's personal laptop, yet nothing else of value had been disturbed. Janet's rings remained on her fingers, and all other valuable household items, jewelry, electronics, even easily pawned goods, were untouched. If robbery had been a motive, none of it made sense. That theory was quickly abandoned. Despite the growing suspicions, investigators still lacked the hard evidence required to detain Raven. So, after his initial interviews, he was released. But his behavior following the incident only deepened the concerns of those around him. Within just 24 hours of Janet's death, Raven packed up his belongings, gathered Caden, and left North Carolina for Utah. While grief affects people in different ways, many found his abrupt departure unsettling. It was understandable that he might not want to remain in the house where such a traumatic event had occurred. But what was less understandable was his complete emotional detachment. Friends and family who spoke to Raven in the days and weeks following Janet's death noted something deeply troubling. He did not appear to be grieving. According to them, Raven was not acting like a man who had just lost his wife in a horrifying and deeply personal attack. He wasn't asking questions. He wasn't pushing for updates from law enforcement. He wasn't expressing anger or sadness. In fact, he seemed eerily calm, even distant. More notably, he did not seem interested in finding out who had taken Janet's life. There were no pleas for justice, no interviews, no social media posts seeking information or answers. In stark contrast, Janet's family was relentless in their pursuit of the truth. Her parents, siblings, and close friends poured their time and energy into trying to keep the case alive. They worked closely with detectives, hoping that some new detail or breakthrough would finally point to the person responsible. They scoured through her journals, emails, and messages, hoping to find something that might help the investigation. Eventually, a new detail emerged, one that shifted the focus back to Raven once again. Investigators discovered that not long before Janet's passing, Raven had taken out a substantial life insurance policy on her. The amount was startling, $600,000. Detectives were immediately troubled by something they found both unusual and deeply telling. Although the Abaroa family had been struggling with serious financial instability for quite some time, no life insurance policies had ever been in place until shortly before Janet's death. That in itself raised questions. But what truly startled investigators was the timing of Raven Abaroa's next move. Not long after his wife's passing, And crucially, before she had even been laid to rest, Raven had already contacted the insurance company in an attempt to begin processing the claim for her policy. For investigators, this was not just premature, it was alarming. To many, it gave the impression of someone who was less focused on grieving a spouse and more concerned with collecting a financial payout. Detectives began digging deeper into Raven's past. They quickly uncovered troubling inconsistencies in the stories he had told not only to law enforcement, but also to Janet herself. During their courtship, Raven had portrayed himself as a devout member of their shared faith, saying he had once traveled to Peru as a missionary for the church. This detail was completely fabricated. In fact, Raven had never served a mission abroad, something that is typically a significant milestone in the life of a faithful Mormon man. While these lies did not directly tie him to the crime, they painted a portrait of someone who was comfortable with deception and manipulation, even in intimate relationships. Following Janet's passing, Raven relocated from North Carolina to Salt Lake City, Utah. He settled into a quiet life with his son, Caden, and on the surface appeared to be attempting a fresh start. With insurance money now reportedly in hand, Raven no longer faced the same financial pressures. While living in Utah, he met a new woman named Vanessa Pond, a caring, soft-spoken kindergarten teacher. Their paths crossed when Raven enrolled his son in her class, and their connection was almost immediate. Soon they began dating, and their relationship developed quickly. But what Raven didn't know was that Janet's family had not stopped paying attention. They remained deeply committed to uncovering the truth, and that included keeping tabs on Raven's new life. The family, still in mourning and desperate for answers, reached out to Vanessa. In an effort to protect another innocent woman, they warned her about Raven's past. They told her that he was not the man he seemed to be, and they urged her to be cautious. But Vanessa, caught up in the early days of love and trust, didn't believe them. She stood by Raven, convinced that the accusations were exaggerated or the result of misunderstanding and grief. Over time, however, cracks began to show in their relationship. After 3 years of dating, Vanessa and Raven married, but soon after the wedding, she began to witness a different side of him. Just like in his first marriage, there were episodes of volatility. Vanessa described Raven's frequent mood swings, bursts of anger, and controlling behavior. At times, he would lose his temper over seemingly minor things, and she started to feel unsafe. She later admitted that she began to question everything, especially whether it was truly possible that her husband had been involved in his first wife's death. While Raven attempted to present himself as cooperative and open, his behavior increasingly raised concerns. He made an unusual choice by giving an interview to the media, where he stated publicly that he hoped the case would be resolved soon so that the police would finally leave him alone. He denied any involvement in Janet's death but showed little emotion when discussing her memory or the tragedy that had unfolded. To those watching, it seemed as if he wanted to shift attention away from himself, while doing little to honor the woman he had lost. Around this time, a new detective took over the case, someone determined to approach the investigation with fresh eyes and unwavering focus. This new lead investigator was deeply committed to uncovering the truth and giving Janet's loved ones the justice they had been waiting for. Her family, still grieving yet relentless in their pursuit of answers, offered full cooperation. They handed over Janet's journals, emails, and communications, and kept in regular contact with the investigative team. Meanwhile, Vanessa was quietly coming to her own realization. The man she had married was not the kind, grieving widower he had portrayed himself to be. She eventually came forward and spoke to the media herself, describing her own troubling experiences. She revealed that Raven often displayed erratic behavior and emotional instability. Over time, she began to believe that he was not only manipulative, but possibly capable of serious harm. Detectives began reconstructing the full timeline of the events leading up to Janet's death. They believed firmly that Raven was responsible, but proving it was another matter. One of the biggest hurdles they faced was his alibi. Multiple individuals had confirmed that they saw Raven at the indoor soccer game on the night of the incident. These witness statements complicated the case significantly, and prosecutors were reluctant to move forward without airtight evidence. Still, the investigators pressed on. They closely examined the 911 call Raven had made on the night of the tragedy. During the call, he told the dispatcher that his wife had been shot, which was quickly proven incorrect. Janet had suffered stab wounds, something that was visually evident even to untrained responders. While some might chalk this up to confusion or shock, Detectives believe this was an intentional misdirection, a tactic to delay or mislead the investigation. As part of a renewed investigative strategy, detectives arranged a follow-up call with Raven. In this phone conversation, they subtly introduced new questions and revisited old ones. Raven repeated the same basic story he had told years earlier, but this time, he struggled even more to recall certain key details. His inability to remember the timeline, combined with vague accusations that police were incompetent, only deepened their suspicions. Wanting to learn more about his character, investigators also reached out to another woman Raven had dated. The responses were startlingly consistent. Several former partners confirmed that he had demonstrated aggressive behavior, controlling tendencies, and emotional manipulation during their relationships. One detail in particular caught the attention of detectives. On the night of Janet's death, Raven had locked his dog in the garage, a behavior that friends and family said was completely out of the ordinary for him. As investigators continued to re-examine every thread of evidence in the tragic case of Janet Abaroa's death, they uncovered yet another disturbing detail that seemed to suggest premeditation. It was revealed that just one day prior to the incident, Raven Abaroa had taken deliberate steps to transfer data from his personal laptop to another storage medium. This transfer raised serious questions for detectives. On February 1, 2010, nearly 5 years after Janet's death, Raven Abaroa was formally arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder. He was apprehended and extradited back to North Carolina to face charges. As preparations for the trial began, detectives resumed combing through earlier forensic findings. It was then that a seemingly small but significant detail caught the attention of one of the lead investigators. On the bedside table near Janet was an open contact lens case, empty. Her parents later told police that she had a specific nightly routine. She never went to bed wearing her contact lenses. To explore this question further, forensic analysts revisited Janet, and in July 2010, 5 years after her death, they discovered what appeared to be the dried, deteriorated remnants of contact lenses still on her eyes. The experts confirmed that Janet had indeed been wearing contact lenses at the time of her death. By 2013, the case was ready to go to trial. Raven Abaroa would finally stand before a judge and jury in a courtroom that was packed with media. The prosecution, understanding the limits of their physical evidence, leaned heavily on the volume and consistency of circumstantial facts. But the defense fought back. In their opening arguments, they sought to redirect attention by pointing to alleged flaws in the initial police investigation. They argued that from the very beginning, law enforcement had narrowed its focus on Raven and had failed to thoroughly explore alternative suspects. They pointed to evidence such as a mysterious fingerprint found on a closet door that did not match either Janet or Raven. These items, the defense claimed, had been neglected or dismissed too quickly. They argued that the prosecution had rushed to fit a theory around Raven without exhaustively pursuing other possibilities. Furthermore, they filed a motion to delay or dismiss the trial, arguing that the character portrayals of both the victim and the accused had been incomplete. That motion was surprisingly granted, and the trial was temporarily halted and rescheduled for March 2014. By the time the next phase of the trial arrived, a major shift had taken place. After nearly a decade of denying any involvement and maintaining his innocence, Raven made a strategic legal decision. He entered into a plea agreement with the prosecution. As part of the deal, Raven Abaroa pleaded guilty, not to first-degree murder, but to the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. This marked a significant turn in the case. Under the terms of the plea, Raven was sentenced to 10 years in prison with eligibility for parole after serving 8 years. On April 8th, just after the first light of dawn, the peaceful and serene atmosphere of the island was abruptly disturbed. A Thai tourist, eager to explore the morning tranquility, had risen early with the intention of hiking the temple trail. Amid the rich, vibrant green of the jungle, something pale and still caught his attention. Initially, he thought it might be a discarded piece of clothing or an abandoned item left behind by another hiker. However, as he drew closer, the shape became more unsettling. Feeling disturbed by the unusual discovery, The tourist immediately contacted local emergency services to report what he had found. Authorities responded quickly, arriving at the scene to investigate further. Thanks to travel documents, personal belongings, and reports from the local hotel, they were soon able to identify the woman. She was Miriam Beelte. Miriam Beelte was born on November 29, 1992, in the quiet city of Hildesheim, nestled in the heart of Lower Saxony, Germany. Raised in a nurturing and intellectually stimulating environment, Miriam developed early on a strong sense of curiosity, a passion for learning, and a deep appreciation for the people around her. Her childhood was marked by close familial bonds and a network of friends who admired not only her sincerity and empathy, but also her steadfast drive to make the most of every opportunity life presented. As she entered adulthood, Miriam pursued her education with unwavering focus. Enrolling in a prestigious university to study engineering, she quickly became known among her professors and peers for her keen intellect and exceptional analytical skills. Her time at university wasn't solely about academic accomplishments, however. It was also a period of significant personal growth. She evolved into a confident, capable young woman who balanced her studies with a broad range of interests, including hiking, photography, and volunteering in environmental initiatives. Her ability to balance work with a sense of wonder made her stand out. She was often described as someone who embraced both logic and beauty. Miriam also harbored a strong affection for nature and exploration. She found peace in green forests, open skies, and the rhythm of the ocean. Traveling became a way for her to reconnect with herself and the world around her. Her journeys were not mere vacations. They were meaningful escapes, opportunities to learn about new cultures, and to gain a deeper understanding of how people live in different corners of the globe. In early 2019, Miriam began planning a trip that reflected all the things she loved most. The destination, Thailand. Known for its breathtaking landscapes, vibrant traditions, and warm hospitality, Thailand seemed the perfect place for her to blend business with leisure. This wasn't her first time combining work with travel. She was experienced in handling both and often made a point of staying a few extra days in places she visited for business, eager to explore them beyond the boardrooms and meeting halls. Her itinerary was carefully crafted. After a series of meetings with suppliers in Bangkok, meetings her colleagues later confirmed had gone exceptionally well, Miriam decided to take a short detour. She planned to visit Pattaya and then the lesser-known but serene island of Koh Sichang. It was the kind of location that offered solitude and scenic beauty, a stark contrast to the bustling urban center she had just left behind. By mid-March, she had arrived on the island. Nestled among the cliffs and sea breezes, Sichang offered a slower pace of life, the kind Miriam found deeply soothing. Her hotel, a modest but charming guest house not far from the beach, became her base. The staff remembered her as polite and thoughtful, someone who seemed to be deeply engaged with the place rather than merely passing through. On one of her final days on the island, Miriam planned to visit an old temple perched high on a hill, an ancient site known for its spiritual energy and panoramic views. Accessible only by a winding stairway hidden behind lush vegetation, the temple was rarely crowded, appealing primarily to those who sought reflection and solitude. Miriam, always respectful of local traditions, had read about the temple in a travel forum and made it one of the highlights of her trip. That morning, everything appeared normal. Locals observed her leaving her guest house with a small backpack, a bottle of water, and her camera. She smiled at the vendor arranging flowers near the foot of the temple stairs and parked her rented motorbike nearby. Surveillance footage later confirmed she had ascended the steps alone, moving with quiet confidence and a calm, thoughtful demeanor. The flower vendor recalled her pausing briefly to admire a jasmine bouquet before heading upward. But as the day wore on, things took an unexpected turn. The motorbike remained parked in the same spot by sunset. The vendor, who had grown accustomed to the rhythms of the island's visitors, noticed this first. He hadn't seen Miriam return from the hill, and that absence began to weigh heavily on his mind. By morning, her belongings were still untouched. The realization that something was wrong began to ripple through the community. Hotel staff attempted to reach her by phone, but calls went unanswered. Messages were left. Her absence was eventually reported to local authorities. When investigators began retracing the last known steps of Miriam Beelte, it quickly became clear that her presence on Sea Chang Island was never intended to be an extended stay. In fact, her itinerary revealed something far more routine and structured. A brief excursion, just 1 day in duration. She had planned it down to the hour, arrive in the morning, visit a scenic hilltop temple, capture a few photos, enjoy a peaceful lunch overlooking the sea, and then return to the mainland by evening. It was the kind of plan that reflected Miriam's personality in every detail: precise, intentional, and cautious. Those who knew her well weren't surprised by the structure of her schedule. Miriam was known to be a highly organized individual. She wasn't one to take spontaneous risks, especially in unfamiliar places. She avoided interactions with strangers unless absolutely necessary, kept her belongings close and secure, and made a point of checking in regularly with family back home. It wasn't simply a habit, it was part of how she made travel feel safe and fulfilling. So when her messages stopped arriving on April 7th, it was more than just a lapse in communication, it was a warning sign. By midday, she was no longer responding to messages. By evening, the silence was complete. Her family, accustomed to receiving updates from her during trips, began to grow worried. What began as mild concern quickly escalated into alarm. It wasn't like Miriam to go off the grid, even for a few hours. That night, uncertainty took root. By the following morning, with no new messages and no check-ins, her loved ones contacted both the German embassy and the local authorities in Thailand, reporting her as missing. Back on the island, the police were already reviewing surveillance footage obtained from the temple trail and the area surrounding the hill. The video showed Miriam climbing the steps toward the temple just as the morning sun began filtering through the trees. She walked steadily, a bottle of water in one hand and a small backpack over her shoulder. Her expression was peaceful. She even smiled briefly at something off camera, perhaps a passing bird or scenic view. That image, still and silent, would become the final confirmed moment of her presence on the island. It was only after authorities began speaking to local residents and shopkeepers that a new detail emerged, one that added a layer of mystery to the already troubling situation. A few days before she disappeared, Miriam had been seen sitting at a small cafe near the main pier. She was not alone. Witnesses remembered her speaking with a man, someone not known to them, and notably not a fellow traveler staying in the usual hotels. While no one could definitively identify him, those who saw the interaction described it as casual but familiar, as though they'd met before. Whether he was someone she had encountered during her travels or perhaps connected to her through her work remained unclear. After that meeting, however, no one reported seeing them together again. The man never checked into any hotel nearby, nor did he appear on ferry logs as a regular visitor. Still, the memory of that coffee shop conversation lingered as a curious and potentially significant clue. Then came April 8th. Just after sunrise, the peaceful calm of the island was disrupted. A Thai tourist had risen early to hike the temple trail, hoping to enjoy the morning's cool air and the soft light through the trees. As he ascended the stone steps, winding through dense foliage, he noticed something odd in the undergrowth just off the path. Amid the rich green of the jungle, something pale and unmoving drew his attention. At first, he thought it might be a discarded piece of clothing, or perhaps a forgotten item left by another hiker. But as he stepped closer, the shape became more unsettling, clearly not part of the natural surroundings. Disturbed by the scene, the tourist immediately contacted local emergency services. Within an hour, police and rescue teams had begun ascending the hill, the mood shifting from routine concern to focused urgency. News spread quickly across the island, and by late morning, a growing number of residents had gathered near the trail's entrance, anxious to understand what was unfolding. Simultaneously, more than 9,000 kilometers away in Germany, Miriam's family was facing a rising tide of dread. When the call came confirming that a woman matching her description had been found near the temple, hope gave way to heartache. Authorities worked swiftly to confirm her identity. Based on travel documents, personal effects, and reports from the hotel, the woman was soon identified as Miriam Beelte, the 26-year-old tourist whose absence had triggered the search. At first, local authorities considered the possibility that her death had been the result of an accident, perhaps a slip on the uneven, sometimes damp trail. The terrain was known to be tricky in places, especially during the early morning hours when dew could make the stone surfaces slick. But upon further inspection of the scene, and after analyzing the footage, that theory began to unravel. Investigators focused their attention on surveillance footage captured at the trailhead and surrounding facilities. In one clip, just minutes after Miriam had disappeared from view, another figure appeared. A man, dressed in dark clothing, who seemed to be walking the same path at a cautious pace. He maintained a distance, but his presence was unmistakable. He was not someone police had previously identified in connection with Miriam. The same camera later captured his return. This time, something was different. His clothes appeared damp and dirtied, with noticeable light smudges across his trousers and sleeves. He glanced around frequently, his movements anxious and hurried. Though he made an effort to appear calm, the footage suggested otherwise. Police soon returned to the flower vendor stationed at the base of the hill. He too remembered the man. At first, he hadn't thought much of it. Tourists came and went often, and solo travelers were not uncommon. But upon closer questioning, he described the man's behavior in more detail. When asked if he had seen anything unusual, the vendor recalled how the man had returned down the trail appearing unsettled. When casually asked if everything was all right, the man replied with a shrug, claiming he had slipped and gotten a bit muddy. Surveillance footage, witness statements, and a key detail from a local flower vendor all came together to reveal the first significant lead in what was becoming one of the most disturbing cases on Sichang Island in recent memory. A license plate number captured on camera near the Temple Trail's entrance was traced back to a motorbike frequently parked near the island's western edge. It belonged to a man named Ranakorn Romruan, a 24-year-old local who, until that moment, had existed mostly on the periphery of the community's attention. Authorities acted swiftly. Officers arrived at Ranakorn's modest home, nestled at the edge of a wooded path, hoping to locate him and begin asking questions about his presence near the scene. But he was not there. His home was locked, quiet. The motorbike was absent. Investigators fanned out across the area, trying to track him down. Something about the sequence of events, the proximity, the timeline, the footage, suggested he might not just be a bystander in this case. They needed answers, and they needed them quickly. As law enforcement delved deeper, a clearer picture of Ranakorn began to form. To the casual observer, he had always been something of a loner, reserved, quiet, often keeping to himself. But beneath that quiet surface, neighbors hinted at something more troubling. Some described his behavior as distant, even slightly unnerving. He rarely made eye contact, avoided social interactions, and spent long hours riding his motorbike through the island's lesser-traveled roads. Others mentioned seeing him pacing alone on the beach at dusk, muttering to himself or staring into the distance as if lost in thought. Few people had ever tried to get close to him, and those who had recalled moments of unpredictable behavior, sharp mood swings, outbursts of frustration, and a tendency to become overwhelmed by social cues. He wasn't violent, they said, but something about his presence had always made people uneasy. So who was this man? And how had his path crossed so tragically with that of Miriam Beelte? A visitor from across the world, simply looking to explore a new place and enjoy a peaceful day. Investigators would later piece together the events of April 7th, 2019 with the help of timelines, camera footage, and eventually Ranakorn's own words. In the early morning hours, while the island remained hushed under the gray-blue light of dawn, Ranakorn woke alone in his small house. It was a morning like many others, except for one crucial difference. Something inside him was restless, unfocused, and unresolved. Unable to sit still, he climbed onto his motorbike and rode aimlessly through the winding coastal roads. At some point, perhaps out of habit or instinct, he found himself near the Temple Trail, a popular spot for both locals and tourists seeking scenic views and a moment of quiet reflection. It was there, at the base of the hill, that he first caught sight of Miriam. She was preparing for her hike, bottle of water in hand, backpack slung casually over one shoulder. There was nothing unusual about her presence. She looked like any other traveler enjoying the island's natural beauty. But something about her struck him, perhaps her composure, her solitude, or the mere fact that she was alone. In an effort to create what he might have perceived as a reason to approach her, Ronicorn entered a nearby flower stall and purchased a small bouquet of marigolds. To a stranger, it might have looked like a simple act of kindness, but the gesture wasn't entirely innocent. It was calculated, designed to invite interaction. Miriam, walking slowly up the trail, heard footsteps behind her. As she turned slightly, Ronicorn approached, flowers in hand. He attempted to speak with her. His words were polite at first, but there was something about the situation that made Miriam cautious. She accepted the flowers with a tentative smile, thanked him, and continued walking. She did not stop. She did not engage beyond basic courtesy. She was firm in her boundaries, something anyone might do in such a situation. But for reasons that would later be explored during intense police questioning, Ronicorn did not let her go. He continued to follow her up the path. What transpired next was not captured on video. The dense foliage, the elevation, and the remote nature of the trail offered no surveillance coverage beyond the initial steps. But what occurred along that stretch of stone and soil would change lives forever. When authorities finally located Ronicorn, it was not through a dramatic confrontation or high-speed chase. In the hours following the discovery on the hillside, he had returned to his home quietly. He had washed his clothes, though some faint discoloration remained. He had placed the flowers on his table. Then he lay on his couch and turned on the television, seemingly trying to immerse himself in something familiar. Those who later reviewed this moment said it was as if he believed that by resuming ordinary routines, the weight of what had happened might somehow disappear. But the moment of reckoning came swiftly. When the police knocked on his door, he did not resist. He opened it slowly, eyes tired, expression unreadable. There was no outburst, no denial. It was as if he had already accepted that this chapter of his life, however private or confusing it had once been, had come to an end. At the station, Ronicorn initially tried to deflect questions. He gave partial answers and inconsistent timelines, but the pressure mounted. The evidence was solid, and the officers questioning him had years of experience reading subtle emotional cues. Eventually, something broke. His demeanor shifted, and he began to speak more openly. Over the next few hours, Ronicorn confessed. His tone was low, his words often faltering, but he walked investigators through the events as he remembered them. He described seeing Miriam, the impulse to follow, and the interaction on the trail. He described a confrontation, one that started with confusion and ended with irreversible consequences. For the investigators listening, even the most hardened among them, there was a quiet unease. The story, though presented calmly, hinted at a disconnect from empathy, a psychological gap that they would later ask forensic specialists to evaluate. But the investigation was not yet complete. A confession, while valuable, was not enough. Authorities needed to verify the details. To fully understand the sequence of events and rule out any inconsistencies, they initiated a formal reenactment. This is standard procedure in many complex cases, especially when visualizing the flow of actions can clarify questions that verbal descriptions alone cannot answer. Ronicorn was escorted back to the temple trail by officers. To shield him from public exposure, his head was covered and the area was temporarily restricted. Step by step, he retraced his actions from that morning. Officers followed closely, observing his movements and comparing them to the evidence they had gathered. The reenactment that took place on Sea Chong Island was one of the final steps in an investigation that had shaken the region and echoed far beyond Thailand's borders. As authorities observed Ronicorn Romruan retrace his actions step by step, what had once been just a collection of statements, footage, and fragments of testimony began to take on chilling clarity. This was no longer just a case on paper. It became a vivid, undeniable reality. Each movement he made during the reconstruction provided further insight into what happened on that ill-fated trail, the isolated stretch of nature that had turned into the setting of a tragedy. When the reenactment ended, officers and legal officials reviewing the footage confirmed what they had already feared. They now had a complete and deeply disturbing picture of the sequence of events that took place on April 7th. Though the reenactment was handled with care and conducted behind closed barriers to shield the process from the public, word of its emotional weight and the grim nature of the details spread quickly through both local and international media channels. As the formal trial of Ranakorn Romruan commenced, the courtroom became more than just a legal venue. It became a symbol of the search for justice, not only for Miriam Beelte and her family, but also for a community still struggling to reconcile how something so horrifying could happen in a place so peaceful. The case drew global attention. Miriam, a young and vibrant woman from Germany, had come to Thailand, as so many do, to experience its beauty, serenity, and hospitality. What happened to her was not just tragic, it struck at the heart of that very image. The trial proceedings were extensively covered by journalists from around the world. Daily updates were broadcast across news outlets, and photos from the courtroom appeared on front pages and social media feeds across multiple continents. For many, it was unthinkable. A promising life ended so suddenly, with no apparent reason beyond the actions of one individual. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution presented its case with methodical precision. The evidence against Ranakorn was substantial and damning. Surveillance footage captured Miriam beginning her walk to the temple. The flower vendor testified with clarity, recounting how the man had returned alone, looking unsettled and offering a vague excuse about slipping on the trail. These details, combined with his confession, painted a sequence that left little room for doubt. Despite the strength of the case, tension in the courtroom was palpable. Ranakorn's confession, while detailed, lacked the element many had hoped for: remorse. He spoke calmly during his interviews, not offering an apology to Miriam's loved ones, nor expressing regret. That cold demeanor made the atmosphere in the courtroom feel even heavier. It wasn't only about what had happened, it was about the emotional void left in its wake. Yet one of the most unexpected and poignant moments came not from the accused, but from his mother. Her sudden appearance in the courtroom surprised many. She had remained silent during the investigation, unknown to most. Now, standing before the judge and the families in attendance, she addressed the court with a trembling voice that was both sorrowful and sincere. She did not come to defend her son. On the contrary, she spoke with a tone of heartbreak, trying to come to terms with how someone she had raised could cause such harm. She revealed that their relationship had deteriorated in recent years, and that her son had distanced himself, growing more isolated and unpredictable over time. She apologized deeply to Miriam's family, offering not excuses, but a plea for understanding, a search for meaning in a situation where there was none to be found. Her message was simple, yet powerful. Even she believed that justice must be served. Her words, "My son has lost himself, and now he must face what he's done," left a lasting impression on everyone in the courtroom. Ranakorn himself remained silent throughout much of the trial. He did not respond to his mother's emotional speech. His attorneys attempted to present a psychological profile, suggesting that he may have suffered from untreated mental health issues, though this argument never gained traction with the court. The focus remained on the facts of the case and the irreversible consequences of his actions. The judicial process moved quickly, a reflection of the overwhelming evidence and the intensity of public interest. Just 3 months after Miriam's disappearance, the court delivered its verdict. The ruling was swift and uncompromising. Ranakorn Romruan was found guilty and sentenced to capital punishment. Appeals for leniency were submitted by his legal team, but they were denied. The court cited the gravity of the crime, the calculated nature of his actions, and his apparent lack of remorse as key factors in their decision. The reaction was immediate. Outside the courthouse, there was a quiet but powerful expression of solidarity. Mourners gathered holding candles, while others placed flowers in remembrance of Miriam. Though far from her home country, she had become a symbol of innocence lost and of a community's refusal to let tragedy define them. Back on Chang Island, the emotional weight of the case continued to linger. What was once a serene destination, known for its gentle waves, small temples, and warm smiles, now carried the burden of a memory too painful to forget. The local community, deeply connected to the identity of their island, worked hard to reclaim the peace they once knew. In the weeks following the trial, residents organized vigils and memorial services in Miriam's honor. At the base of the temple trail, visitors and locals alike created a small memorial. Candles, letters, hand-picked flowers, and quiet prayers marked the place where her journey came to an end. It was a space for reflection, for grief, and for the reaffirmation of a shared commitment to peace. What had once been a search and rescue mission began to feel more like a pursuit of truth in the face of a rapidly darkening reality. As the day wore on, the search extended deeper into the wooded area, pushing beyond the well-worn trails and into denser, more remote terrain. It was there, tragically hidden under the makeshift covering, that they made the devastating discovery. Jodi concealed in a way that suggested not just an effort to hide, but perhaps a last, desperate attempt to delay the inevitable truth from coming to light. Jodi Sanderholm came into the world on September 26, 1987, in the quiet town of Arkansas City, Kansas, born to her loving parents, Brian and Cindy Sanderholm. She was the third child in the family, the youngest of three siblings. Jodi grew up in a warm, close-knit household alongside her older brother Jason and her sister Jennifer. From an early age, Jodi exhibited a deep passion for dancing. She managed to strike a delicate balance between her artistic pursuits and her studies, earning a reputation as a well-rounded and disciplined young woman. After completing high school, she enrolled at Cowley College, a local institution where she chose to pursue a degree in pre-pharmacy, a testament to her intellectual curiosity and desire to build a meaningful career. On the morning of January 5, 2007, Jodi prepared to attend a dance rehearsal at her college. She left home in her Dodge Stratus, expecting to return later in the day. The rehearsal was scheduled to conclude around 10:45 a.m. As she departed, there was nothing to indicate that this day would be any different from the many before it. But as the morning passed, unease began to creep in. Jodi's mother, Cindy, attempted to reach her several times via cell phone. The calls went unanswered, which immediately struck her as unusual and deeply troubling. Jodi was known to be responsive, particularly to her family. Cindy's concern grew rapidly. Trusting her instincts as a mother, she left work early and drove home to check if Jodi had perhaps returned without letting anyone know. When she arrived at the house, Cindy noticed something alarming right away. Jodi's car was not parked outside. This was especially concerning because by that time, Jodi's rehearsal would have been over for more than an hour. With her heart sinking, Cindy entered the house and looked around. The interior showed no signs of Jodi having returned. As the clock continued to tick, Jodi missed a noon appointment, a further red flag that added to the growing sense that something was terribly wrong. Cindy and Brian began contacting Jodi's friends, hoping that someone might have seen her or had spoken to her after the rehearsal ended. But one by one, they heard the same unsettling response. No one had seen Jodi after she left the college campus that morning. By 6 p.m., with hours having passed and no word from their daughter, the Sanderholms made the difficult but necessary decision to contact law enforcement and report her missing. The local sheriff's department took the report seriously from the outset. Officers quickly got to work, creating and distributing missing person flyers that featured a recent photograph of Jodi along with a physical description. They canvassed the area and began speaking with those who might have had any relevant information. One of the first steps investigators took was to try and understand Jodi's personal life. They learned from her parents that Jodi had a boyfriend named Colby Wilson, a young man she had been in a relationship with since their high school days. When police reached out to Colby to inquire about his whereabouts, he informed them that he had been staying with his brother in Texas for several days. This alibi was promptly verified, allowing authorities to rule him out as a person of interest in the early stages of the investigation. The next day, Saturday, January 6th, brought a pivotal development in the search for answers. Investigators spoke with Jodi's closest friend, Lori Leglighter, who had known her since high school. Lori provided investigators with a detail that initially seemed minor, but would soon take on greater significance. She remembered that on the evening of Tuesday, January 2nd, just a few days before Jodi went missing, she had left work at the Sirloin Stockade restaurant, located in Arkansas City, sometime around 10 p.m. As she exited the building, she noticed a light blue car that drove past the restaurant multiple times. At the time, it struck her as unusual, but not necessarily alarming. This sighting was one of the first clues that investigators hoped could help them identify potential suspects or witnesses. Investigators began looking into similar reports and checking local surveillance footage for a vehicle matching Lori's description. As Lori was driving home from her shift at the Sirloin Stockade restaurant in Arkansas City, she noticed something in her rearview mirror that immediately made her uneasy. A car, a light blue sedan, seemed to be following her, but the longer it remained behind her, mimicking her every turn, the more certain she became that something was off. "I thought something strange was going on," Lori later told investigators, recounting the unsettling drive. To test her instincts, she began taking a deliberately winding route home, turning onto smaller streets she didn't usually use. Each time she changed direction, the car behind her did the same. It was no longer just a passing car, it was clearly trailing her. Growing increasingly alarmed, Lori made a split-second decision. Instead of heading straight home, she redirected her car toward a place she hoped would deter whoever was behind her, the local police station. Once there, she pulled into the parking lot and parked beside the building, hoping the person would see she wasn't alone and back off. For a moment, her plan seemed to work. The suspicious car didn't pull in behind her, and after waiting for a short while and seeing no sign of it nearby, Lori cautiously left and resumed her drive home. As she continued on her way, she saw it again. That same blue car was now trailing her a second time. Alarmed by the persistence of the driver, Lori once again turned back and returned to the area near the police station. This time, however, she didn't go inside. She later explained that she dismissed the incident as a dumb prank, or perhaps just someone being foolish or trying to scare her. On Friday morning, January 5th, Lori and Jodi both attended a scheduled dance rehearsal for the Cowley Tigerette line at Cowley College. They arrived around the same time, as they often did, and parked their cars near one another in the campus lot. Parked nearby was the same light blue car she had seen earlier that week, and this time she recognized the driver. His name was Justin Thurber, a 23-year-old local who had been seen around town, often in the company of his brother or other young men in the area. Lori had seen his face before. He wasn't a stranger exactly, but she had never interacted with him. Still, his presence near the college that morning felt jarring, especially in light of her recent experience. After the rehearsal ended, Lori and Jodi both left around the same time. As investigators began collecting statements from members of the dance team and others on campus, more information began to emerge. Several of the other Tigerette dancers came forward to say they too had noticed a man, later confirmed to be Justin Thurber, lingering near the college in the days leading up to Jodi's disappearance. The consistency with which he appeared began to feel suspicious. While the community at large was still absorbing the shock of Jodi's sudden disappearance, the police were moving swiftly. In the first 24 hours, officers combed the area, driving throughout Arkansas City in hopes of locating Jodi's car. Despite their extensive search, the vehicle could not be found. It was as if both Jodi and her car had vanished into thin air. However, a critical piece of evidence surfaced through her cell phone data. Investigators tracked the last signal from Jodi's phone to a cell tower near the Kaw Wildlife Area, a remote and sprawling nature preserve just outside of town. This led officers to believe that if Jodi had been taken or had gone somewhere unexpectedly, she may have been taken in that direction. At this stage of the investigation, one name kept coming up: Justin Thurber. He had not only been seen by Lori on the day of the rehearsal, but now several other young women recalled seeing him at or near campus more than once in recent days. It was enough to raise serious red flags. Police officially classified him as a person of interest. What made his presence even more concerning was that this wasn't the first time authorities had crossed paths with him. Though still in his early 20s, Justin Thurber was already known to law enforcement. His past encounters with police, while not publicly detailed at this point in the investigation, added to the weight of suspicion. On December 31st, 2006, just 6 days before Jodi Sanderholm would vanish without a trace, Justin Thurber found himself back in the custody of law enforcement. He had once again been arrested, this time for theft, marking yet another entry on a growing list of run-ins with the law. After posting a $3,000 bond the very same day, Thurber was released from custody and rang in the new year, as if nothing had happened, celebrating the evening freely despite his most recent brush with the law. The very next day, on January 1st, the beginning of a new year that would soon be darkened by tragedy, Justin was already involved in yet another troubling episode. According to police records and witness statements, he was seen pretending to be a law enforcement officer, attempting to impersonate police in public settings. His actions caused confusion and disrupted the peace, drawing attention from actual authorities. When confronted by real officers, Thurber suddenly began complaining of chest pain, claiming a medical emergency. Instead of being taken to the station for questioning, he was transported to a nearby hospital for evaluation. What happened after his medical checkup, however, remains murky. For reasons that were never fully clarified, Thurber was not taken into custody after his release from the hospital. He simply walked free again, despite having impersonated a police officer, a serious offense under most circumstances. The lack of immediate consequences puzzled even some officers involved in the case. On January 6th, as the investigation into Jodi Sanderholm's disappearance was gaining momentum, a sharp-eyed officer noticed a familiar car parked in front of a house, Justin Thurber's light blue Cadillac. The vehicle was parked outside his parents' residence, and the officer decided to stop and speak with Justin directly, hoping to get a clearer picture of his movements in recent days. When asked where he had been the day before, Justin launched into a story that quickly raised more questions than it answered. He claimed that he had driven to Winfield, a town roughly 13 miles northeast of Arkansas City, earlier that morning. There, he said, he had met up with a friend and two of that friend's acquaintances, though he emphasized he didn't know the other two individuals very well. He then claimed to have decided to walk from that area all the way toward Arkansas City, a distance of about 30 miles from the Cedar Vale region. After walking for nearly 6 hours, according to his account, he became exhausted and called his father to come pick him up. His father later confirmed this version of events, telling officers that when he found Justin, his son appeared wet and dirty, as if he had been outdoors for a long period. He was picked up near the vicinity of the Cali State Fishing Lake, a remote area not far from the Kyle Wildlife Area, the very same location where Jodi's phone had last pinged. Justin further explained that he had left his car behind in Winfield, and that friends had later returned it to him. The timeline, the distance, and the vague details about the people he had been with all seemed suspicious, but at that point, officers lacked concrete evidence to detain him. Later that same day, law enforcement conducted an interview with Alexis Schwartzel, a young woman who had recently ended a long-term relationship with Justin Thurber. The two had dated for approximately 3 years, and her insight into his behavior would soon prove important. During the interview, Alexis shared that Justin had frequently taken her on drives to the Kyle Wildlife Area, southeast of Arkansas City. When Alexis was informed that police were looking into the disappearance of Jodi Sanderholm, her reaction was one of genuine shock. She then recalled something that seemed chilling in hindsight. During their relationship, Justin had once casually mentioned that he had started noticing Jodi when he was just 13 years old. It was a comment she hadn't thought much of at the time, but now it carried a different, more unsettling meaning. Detectives also asked Alexis about the reasons behind her decision to end the relationship. She didn't hesitate to explain that she had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Justin's behavior. According to her, he had become emotionally aggressive and displayed disturbing tendencies that had only worsened as time went on. These weren't just personality quirks, she said. They were signs of someone growing more unpredictable. While police still didn't have hard proof tying Justin Thurber directly to Jodi's disappearance, there was enough circumstantial evidence and troubling behavior to justify taking action. That evening on January 6th, detective made the decision to place Justin under arrest, not for Jodi's case directly, but on a combination of charges that included bail revocation and criminal trespass. These charges were connected to the fact that Justin had been seen on the Cowley College campus, a location he was believed to be barred from entering. When confronted, Justin made it clear that he didn't intend to answer questions at that moment. Meanwhile, officers executed a search warrant at his parents' home, looking for any physical evidence that might connect him to Jodi or clarify his recent activities. During the search, they collected a pair of shoes Justin had worn the day before. They were found drying on a towel and were still damp. According to Justin's father, he had helped his son clean the mud off them. Officers also seized the clothing Justin had been wearing when his father picked him up. While these clothes had already been washed, They were still collected as part of the investigation. Investigators were building a profile, assembling timelines, and closing in on the truth. It was now a race against time, and the clock was ticking. The morning of January 7th marked a crucial turning point in the search for Jodi Sanderholm. As the sun rose over the Kansas horizon, search teams resumed their efforts in the vast and densely wooded terrain of the Kyle Wildlife Area. Hours into the search, investigators stumbled upon a significant piece of physical evidence, a distinct set of shoe prints. Upon closer analysis, the tread pattern of these prints matched those of Justin Thurber's sneakers. Even more troubling, alongside those tracks were additional, smaller shoe prints believed to belong to a young woman. As members of the search team wrapped up another exhaustive day combing the Kyle Wildlife Area for any sign of missing Jodi Sanderholm on their way back to base, they chose to detour past Cowley County State Fishing Lake, a nearby location that had not yet been thoroughly examined. This decision wasn't random. It was sparked by a detail that had stuck with investigators since earlier interviews. Justin Thurber's father had reported that when he picked up his son from the side of the road, Justin was soaking wet, caked in mud, and visibly disheveled. Following that clue, the team arrived at the lake and began scanning the area near the shoreline. What they discovered was nothing short of chilling. Scattered across the edge of the water and concealed within dense brush were several personal items, some partially submerged in the shallows, others tossed aside as if discarded in haste. Among the recovered belongings were a pair of cut-off sweatshorts, a wallet containing Jodi Sanderholm's driver's license and her social security card, and a black leotard, an item consistent with the official attire worn by members of the Tigerette dance team to which Jodi belonged. Perhaps the most unnerving find, however, was a single sandal lying alone near the lake's edge. Upon closer inspection, the tread pattern on the sole was an exact match to one found earlier at the Kyle Wildlife Area, directly tying these two separate locations together. What followed over the next 48 hours was a coordinated and intense operation. Search teams composed of law enforcement officers, trained volunteers, and sonar specialists expanded their efforts to cover the surrounding woodlands and waters of both the Cowley County State Fishing Lake and the Kyle Wildlife Area. While some teams continued combing the underbrush, others focused on the lake itself, using sonar and specialized diving equipment to inspect beneath the surface. That's when they made two significant discoveries. First, Jodi's vehicle was located submerged in the lake, confirming the worst fears of investigators. Second, Jodi herself was located in the wildlife preserve, concealed beneath a layer of fallen leaves, twigs, and forest debris. Though the car's interior had been fully flooded, and many believed it unlikely that usable trace evidence would remain, forensic technicians refused to give up. They spent countless hours combing the upholstery, carpets, and interior panels, searching for even the smallest fragment of physical evidence. Their diligence paid off. Embedded in the fabric of the driver's seat, investigators found a single short strand of hair, small in size but potentially massive in legal weight. The hair was sent to a forensic lab for mitochondrial DNA testing, the director of a leading DNA testing facility. The results came back conclusive. The hair was almost certainly Justin Thurber's, making it the first direct forensic evidence placing him inside Jodi's vehicle. By reviewing cell tower records, investigators traced the locations of both Jodi's mobile phone and Justin Thurber's phone on the day of her disappearance. The data showed that the two phones moved through the same areas at the same times over the course of the day, strongly suggesting that Thurber had either been closely following her or traveling alongside her without her knowledge. The overlap wasn't minor, it was consistent and frequent, providing a technological timeline that confirmed suspicions of stalking. This digital trail was further corroborated by witness testimony. Lori Leglighter, Jodi's best friend and a fellow Tigerette, came forward and told authorities that she had seen Justin Thurber in the Cowley College parking lot on the morning Jodi disappeared. She recalled his presence with clarity, his distinctive light blue Cadillac parked unusually close to the rehearsal area. Investigators immediately obtained surveillance footage from campus security cameras, and Lori's memory was validated. The footage clearly showed Thurber's Cadillac parked near the dance studio. Even more telling, the video captured Jodi leaving rehearsal, walking to her car, and driving away, followed almost immediately by Thurber's vehicle, which exited the lot just moments after hers. That detail was crucial. It confirmed that he had tailed her from the college, raising strong suspicions that he intended to intercept her at some point afterward. Investigators believed was when he acted. Near the Sanderholm family mailbox, officers found a shoe print in the dirt. Analysis confirmed that the tread matched the soles of the same shoes Thurber had been seen wearing days earlier. The same pair police had recovered drying on a towel at his home, clean but still holding traces of mud. From physical items and forensic samples to digital records and eyewitness accounts, the investigation was building a comprehensive timeline, one that increasingly pointed to Justin Thurber's involvement in Jodi's disappearance. The footprints discovered earlier in the Kaw wildlife area were now placed in even sharper context. Forensic analysis confirmed two distinct sets. One matched Justin's shoes, while the other matched Jodi's sandals, like the one recovered near the lake. More chillingly, the two sets of prints walked side by side for a distance, suggesting she had been forced to walk alongside him into the woods. Then suddenly, Jodi's prints disappeared. From that point forward, only Thurber's tracks continued, deepening into the earth, likely due to the added weight of carrying someone. Inconsistencies in Justin Thurber's alibi soon unraveled. All three individuals he had claimed to be with on the day of Jodi's disappearance were interviewed by police, and each one denied having seen or spoken with him that day. With mounting physical evidence, witness accounts, digital tracking data, and a failed alibi, the case against Justin Thurber had turned from circumstantial to compelling. Three officers accompanied him on a trip to Cedar Vale, the remote area where he had previously claimed his car had gotten stuck. The idea was simple. If Thurber was telling the truth, he should be able to point out the exact location where he had allegedly been stranded. However, once they arrived in the area, it quickly became apparent that Justin was either confused or deliberately evasive. He wandered through the terrain but failed to identify the spot with any clarity. Back at the police station, perhaps attempting to appear cooperative or confident in his innocence, Justin Thurber made an unexpected move. He volunteered to take a polygraph test. He also made a specific request. He wanted his relative, Chad Monroe, present during the examination. Chad was not just a family member. He was employed by the Cowley County Sheriff's Office. The request raised eyebrows among investigators, but it was granted. Despite Thurber's apparent willingness to participate in the investigation, the volume of physical and testimonial evidence that had been collected was already enough to formally indict him. As the case moved toward trial, Justin Thurber's defense team mounted a strategy aimed at avoiding the harshest penalties. One of their central claims was that Justin was mentally unfit to stand trial. However, this argument faced serious obstacles. Evidence presented in court demonstrated that Thurber had graduated from high school and had even completed some college coursework. As a result, the presiding judge rejected the defense's motion, ruling that Thurber was fully competent to stand trial. Once the trial began, it became evident that the prosecution had built a comprehensive case. In addition to the forensic and digital evidence, the state called a number of witnesses whose testimonies painted a chilling pattern of behavior. Alongside Alexis Schwartzel, Thurber's former girlfriend, who had already shared troubling accounts of his violent tendencies, 6 additional women came forward to testify. After several weeks of testimony, the case was handed over to the jury. On February 17, 2009, after careful deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict. Justin Thurber was found guilty on all counts related to Jodi Sanderholm's disappearance and death. Given the nature of the crime and the overwhelming evidence, the jury also unanimously recommended that he receive the death penalty. With the weight of the sentence looming, Thurber made a last-ditch attempt to avoid capital punishment. He attempted to enter into plea negotiations, hoping that by accepting guilt, he might receive a lesser sentence, perhaps life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, this effort was quickly blocked by the Sanderholm family. For them, justice required the full application of the law. They strongly opposed any agreement that would allow Thurber to escape the sentence the jury had already recommended. In March 2009, Justin Thurber was formally sentenced to death by injection. In the aftermath of this devastating case, the state of Kansas responded with legislative action. In 2008, before the trial had even concluded, the state enacted Jodi's Law, a bill named in honor of Jodi Sanderholm. This law aimed to strengthen protections for potential victims by expanding the legal definition of stalking. It gave law enforcement greater authority to intervene in cases where an individual was being harassed or followed, even when the behavior did not meet previous thresholds for criminal action. Despite the conviction and the sentence, Justin Thurber did not stop fighting the outcome. Over the years, he continued to file appeals, seeking to overturn the verdict or reduce the punishment. One of his most notable appeals occurred in 2018, nearly a decade after the original trial. That year, the Kansas Supreme Court temporarily postponed Thurber's death sentence, citing a ruling from the Supreme Court of the United States. This ruling prohibited the execution of individuals with intellectual disabilities, even in cases where the cognitive limitations were classified as mild. Thurber's legal team argued that he fell within that protected category. However, the Sanderholm family and the original prosecution team strongly disagreed. They pointed out that a full competency hearing had already been conducted as part of the initial trial process, and Thurber had been declared mentally competent by qualified professionals. As of this latest development, Justin Thurber, now 39 years old, remains incarcerated. Thurber's status within the correctional system has not changed. He is still listed as being on death row, pending the outcome of ongoing appeals and legal motions. Nearly 5 years later, the case took an unexpected and dramatic turn. In 2012, a hiker was making his way through a remote, rugged mountainside near the town of Delta when he noticed something strange hidden among the rocks and dry underbrush. At first glance, he assumed it was just a pile of discarded debris or trash left behind by someone. But as he got closer, he realized with a shock that what he had discovered was human. Disturbed and alarmed, the hiker immediately contacted the local authorities. Law enforcement responded swiftly, and forensic specialists were brought in to examine the scene. After conducting a series of careful and detailed forensic tests, investigators were able to confirm what many had feared. It was Paige Birgfeld. Paige Birgfeld entered the world on April 27, 1973, in the warm, bustling city of Atlanta, Georgia. She was the second-born child in a hard-working immigrant family who had journeyed all the way from the Mariana Islands to seek a better life in the United States. Her parents, Suzanne and Frank Birgfeld, had carried with them generations of cultural values, resilience, and a strong commitment to family. From a young age, Paige displayed an extraordinary sense of empathy and a natural inclination toward helping others. Whether it was bandaging a friend's scraped knee during recess or comforting a classmate going through a tough time, she was always the one others turned to for support. Determined to turn her passion into a lifelong vocation, Paige enrolled in the nursing program at the University of Florida. College life marked a transformative chapter for her. Far from home for the first time, she adapted quickly, building strong friendships and throwing herself into her studies with characteristic enthusiasm. It was during these years that she met Howard Beegler, a fellow student with a magnetic charm and a genuine interest in healthcare. Their connection was instant. Upon completing her nursing degree, Paige made the decision to return to Colorado, where her parents had relocated. Though they had graduated and were living apart, she and Howard stayed in constant contact. Their bond remained unshaken by the distance. Then, in 1995, just a year after Paige returned home, she and Howard were married in an intimate ceremony attended by close friends and family. However, as the months went by, a profound difference between them began to surface. While Paige dreamed of one day becoming a mother and creating a large, loving family, Howard had a different vision for the future, one that did not include children. After nearly 2 years of contemplation, heart-to-heart conversations, and emotional soul-searching, Paige and Howard came to a painful but mutual decision. In 1997, they officially parted ways. Following this major life change, Paige found herself standing at a personal and professional crossroads. Seeking financial stability and a new beginning, she began working at a prominent Denver nightlife venue. Wanting to maintain privacy and separate her personal identity from her professional role, she adopted the pseudonym Madison. While the environment was vastly different from the medical world she had come from, Paige approached it with the same professionalism, charisma, and resilience that had always defined her. It was during this time that Paige crossed paths with Rob Dixon, a confident and charismatic entrepreneur whose family owned a successful regional business empire. The chemistry between them was undeniable. What started as friendly conversations quickly developed into a passionate romance that swept them both off their feet. Within a year of meeting, in 1998, Paige and Rob were married in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of their social circle. Together, they moved into a spacious, upscale home nestled in the picturesque suburbs of Colorado. Over the next few years, she gave birth to 3 children. She embraced motherhood with all her energy, becoming not just a devoted parent, but the emotional anchor of the entire household. By 2001, Paige's life appeared to be everything she had once longed for: a loving husband, 3 beautiful children, and a home filled with laughter. But as the years went on, unseen cracks began to form beneath the surface. Rob's business ventures, once thriving and full of promise, began to falter. A series of financial setbacks took a toll on the Dixon family's fortune. What started as minor concerns turned into severe financial distress. Eventually, the situation became untenable, and Rob filed for bankruptcy. By 2004, the strain had reached its peak. The couple's relationship, once passionate and supportive, had become fraught with conflict. One evening, during a particularly intense dispute, Paige reached a breaking point. In a state of fear and emotional distress, she picked up the phone and called emergency services. Her voice, trembling with emotion, conveyed both fear and concern. She reported that Rob had used threatening language during the argument, remarks that deeply unsettled her and left her worried for the safety of their children. It wasn't a call made in haste, but one born from genuine fear for the well-being of those she loved most. Several officers from the local police department arrived at the Dixon residence without delay, fully prepared to intervene and ensure the safety of both the woman and her children. However, when officers reached the residence, they encountered an unexpected scene. Standing at the front door were Paige and Rob, side by side. Their expressions were calm, perhaps overly so, as if rehearsed. Paige stepped forward and politely informed the officers that everything was under control. She claimed the disagreement had been resolved and that there was no longer any reason for concern. With no visible signs of harm and no legal grounds to press further, the officers had no choice but to leave. Approximately 1 year later, in a far more urgent and emotionally charged state, Paige made another call to the police, this time reporting something much more serious. According to her statement, an altercation had taken place between her and Rob. Paige said the confrontation occurred while she was holding their youngest child in her arms. The report described Rob displaying sudden aggression, behavior that crossed a dangerous line. Rob was brought in for questioning and subsequently charged with third-degree assault. As the legal process moved forward, he eventually agreed to a plea deal, admitting guilt to one of the lesser counts in exchange for avoiding a more severe sentence. The case was closed, and Rob did not serve time behind bars, but the impact of the situation lingered long after the court's decision. The relationship, once fueled by love and ambition, had devolved into a constant stream of tension, arguments, and emotional strain. Eventually, it became undeniable. Their relationship was no longer sustainable. Recognizing that it would be healthier for both themselves and their children to go their separate ways, Paige and Rob decided to finalize their separation. With quiet determination, Paige balanced parenting, work, and the ongoing stress of rebuilding her life. She remained deeply devoted to her children, making sure their daily routines remained stable and loving, despite the emotional challenges. Then came June 28, 2007. On what initially seemed like a typical summer day, Paige left her children in the trusted care of her close friend Carol. Carol, who often worked part-time as a nanny, had long been a reliable figure in the family's life. Paige had some errands to run and promised to be back soon. Those who knew her well consistently described her as punctual, responsible, and meticulous, especially when it came to her kids. So when the hours passed and Paige neither returned home nor responded to calls, a sense of unease quickly settled in. At first, everyone hoped there had simply been a delay, but as Friday turned into Saturday and still there was no word from Paige, the concern grew into alarm. It was Paige's young daughter, 8-year-old Jess, who took the first real step toward action. With a maturity well beyond her years, Jess insisted on going to the local police station. Accompanied by Carol, the girl reported her mother missing. Soon, a large-scale search was launched. On Sunday, July 1st, 2007, just days after Paige vanished, a red Ford Focus was discovered parked in an unfamiliar area. It was immediately identified as belonging to Paige. Even more disturbing, the vehicle was in flames. Firefighters quickly extinguished the blaze, but it was already too late. The car was heavily damaged, and hopes of finding Paige inside, or any straightforward clue, were dashed. What raised immediate suspicions was the nature of the fire. The area surrounding the vehicle showed no signs of other ignition sources. The damage was isolated exclusively to the car. The district attorney took particular interest in this detail. He publicly stated that the fire appeared to be intentional and not the result of any accident. Even worse, the district attorney did not rule out the possibility that she may have already lost her life. Forensic teams combed through the remains of the vehicle, examining every scorched surface for clues. They looked for anything: a fingerprint, a fiber, a trace of fuel that might explain what had happened to Paige or where she had gone in those final hours. Sheriff later provided a crucial insight into one of the most disturbing aspects of the investigation. According to him, setting a vehicle on fire is a tactic that is sadly not uncommon in serious criminal cases. Arson is often used not just to destroy property, but to eliminate potential evidence that might otherwise offer critical leads. In Paige's case, it was clear that someone wanted to make sure no such evidence remained. Despite the extent of the damage caused by the flames, forensic specialists were still able to extract valuable clues from what remained of the car. During the investigation, one small but telling detail stood out. The driver's seat had been adjusted all the way back. This seemingly minor observation turned out to be quite revealing. The settings suggested that the last person to operate the vehicle was likely taller than Paige, who stood at an average height. It strongly indicated that someone else had most likely been driving her car before it was abandoned and set ablaze. Investigators found that specific pages were missing from Paige's personal planner or notebook, those corresponding to the dates between June 26th and June 29th. These were precisely the days surrounding her disappearance. While the physical search pressed on, the police also launched a parallel investigation into the people closest to Paige. Their goal was to reconstruct her recent movements, conversations, and state of mind leading up to the day she vanished. Naturally, her ex-husband Rob was high on their list. At the time, Rob was living in Pennsylvania, far from Colorado, but due to their volatile history, including the 2 previously filed domestic incident reports during their marriage, investigators knew they couldn't overlook him. During questioning, the detectives focused on establishing a clear timeline. They wanted to know exactly when Rob had last traveled to Colorado, whether he had any recent contact with Paige, and whether anyone could verify his whereabouts. Rob firmly maintained that he had been at his home in Pennsylvania on the day Paige disappeared. He emphasized that he had nothing to do with her vanishing and had no reason to wish her harm. After the interview, Rob surprised some observers by becoming actively involved in the search efforts. His behavior gave the impression of someone genuinely concerned, although opinions about his motives remained divided among the public. Meanwhile, attention also turned to another figure from Paige's past, her first husband, Howard. Interestingly, after her split from Rob, Paige had rekindled communication with Howard. Howard revealed that he had seen Paige shortly before she vanished. According to his statement, on June 28th, the very day Paige disappeared, the two had met in Eagle County, a location that was roughly halfway between their respective homes. Howard explained that the meeting was business-related, though it also gave them an opportunity to catch up in person. After spending a portion of the day together, the two parted ways, and according to Howard, they continued to talk via phone after the meeting. When he later learned of Paige's disappearance, Howard said he didn't hesitate. He contacted emergency services immediately. He expressed a firm belief that Paige would never have simply vanished, and especially not without contacting her children. Cell tower data showed that Howard's phone had indeed been in the Denver area that day, several hours away from the site where Paige was last seen. That verification allowed investigators to confidently rule him out as a suspect. Only a few days after the shocking discovery of Paige's burning car, a new and unexpected lead emerged. this time purely by chance. A motorist had pulled over to the side of a highway southeast of the city to fix a flat tire. As he stepped out of his vehicle, something caught his eye in the grass, a checkbook lying half buried near the edge of the road. Curious and sensing that it might be something important, the man immediately contacted local authorities. Scattered in the nearby brush and along the roadside were several of Paige's personal effects. Among them were her medical records, insurance documents, and other items tied directly to her. The presence of these belongings, miles away from the original crime scene, suggested that someone had gone to considerable effort to disperse her possessions, either to mislead investigators or perhaps, as some speculated, to send a message. Sheriffs later remarked that some pages from the checkbook had been torn out, mirroring the earlier discovery of missing pages from Paige's planner. The small but revealing discovery of a business card lying along a rural stretch of highway would ultimately turn out to be the key that unlocked an entirely new and unexpected chapter in the mysterious case of Paige's disappearance. The card featured the name Carrie, a name that meant nothing to detectives at the time. But a few calls and cross-references quickly confirmed what no one had imagined. Carrie was a name used by Paige herself. This startling revelation opened up a side of her life that no one, not even her closest friends or family, had known existed. Further investigation revealed that Paige had a second phone, completely separate from her personal and family communications. This phone, investigators soon realized, was used exclusively for matters related to her second identity and the secret work she conducted under the alias. With access to that phone, detectives obtained call logs that offered a glimpse into her last known interactions before vanishing. The final outgoing call from that device was made on the evening of June 28th at approximately 9 p.m., just hours before Paige was reported missing. Based on the contacts listed in her call history, police began to assemble a list of individuals who may have had some connection to Paige's disappearance. 7 names quickly stood out as potentially relevant, and investigators started the process of interviewing each person. Among those names was one that drew immediate and heightened attention: Lester. Lester had a documented criminal history, and his past included a felony conviction that had resulted in a 5-year prison sentence. Though the specific nature of his earlier offense was not initially disclosed, it was enough to raise red flags. In addition to his background, Lester's physical characteristics and behaviors began to line up in troubling ways with earlier accounts shared by people who knew Paige. One particularly concerning piece of information came from Carol Lindholm, Paige's longtime friend and trusted nanny. Carol recalled a disturbing story that Paige had once shared with her. On that occasion, Paige had been leaving her office building late in the day. As she walked toward her Ford vehicle in the parking lot, she noticed an unfamiliar white car parked directly behind it, effectively blocking her exit. Paige, frustrated but determined, got into her car, maneuvered out of the tight spot, and in the process slightly tapped the other vehicle. Rather than address the situation, the unknown driver fled the scene without a word, leaving Paige shaken and confused. But now that same white car had resurfaced as a potential clue, particularly because Lester was known to drive a similar vehicle. They began to explore the theory that Lester, perhaps obsessed with Paige. To better understand the nature of their connection, police thoroughly examined Paige's call records and client logs. It turned out that 55-year-old Lester worked as a mechanic, specializing in the repair and maintenance of recreational vehicles. Paige had been introduced to him through her secondary line of work. His behavior had reportedly made her uncomfortable, so she asked Carol, who occasionally provided services for clients, to meet with him. Carol initially hesitated, but eventually, perhaps to help her friend or out of concern, she agreed and went in Paige's place. As detectives delved deeper into Lester's background and routines, they uncovered a detail that sent a chill through the investigative team. Lester's repair shop was located almost directly across the street from the remote location where Paige's burned car had been discovered. Lester was brought in for another round of questioning. He willingly agreed to speak with detectives, appeared cooperative, and did not request legal representation. On July 5, 2007, he sat for a detailed interview at the sheriff's office. Throughout the session, Lester answered each question calmly and denied having any knowledge of Paige's disappearance. He maintained a friendly tone and even volunteered to provide his fingerprints and a DNA sample, which he claimed would prove his innocence. But one detail stood out to investigators, and it wasn't something Lester said. It was his height. When compared with the position of the driver's seat in Paige's Ford, the seat that had been pushed all the way back, Lester's tall stature was a perfect match. Eventually, detectives obtained a warrant to search Lester's home and workplace. What they found during that search only deepened their concerns. Among the items recovered was a disposable, unregistered mobile phone, commonly referred to as a burner phone. Records showed that multiple attempts to contact Paige had been made from this phone on the day she vanished. When confronted with the phone and its activity, Lester flatly denied ever owning such a device. However, the evidence was building. Investigators examined the packaging found in Lester's residence and traced it to a specific supermarket on North Avenue. From there, they reviewed surveillance footage from the store's security cameras. What they saw left little room for doubt. Lester was captured on video purchasing a disposable phone, matching the one recovered in his home, just days before Paige's disappearance. Despite the clarity of the images and the fact that the timeline aligned perfectly, he continued to deny any involvement or knowledge. His unwillingness to admit what was plainly visible to everyone else only increased the pressure surrounding him. With mounting circumstantial evidence, growing inconsistencies in his statements, and a series of connections too strong to dismiss, Lester became the central figure in a case. With the case stalled and leads thinning out, authorities hoped that a trained service dog might be able to uncover new clues, or at the very least confirm existing suspicions. The results were both revealing and unsettling. The dog responded immediately upon entering the vehicle. Investigators interpreted this as further confirmation that Paige had likely been in the car during or shortly before it was set on fire. But that wasn't all. The dog also reacted to another scent inside the vehicle, a scent it later matched to Lester. If accurate, it meant that Lester had been inside the car at some point, either before or after it had been torched. However, despite this development, the case was still lacking what prosecutors call direct evidence. While the clues were mounting, none of it, on its own, was definitive. There were no eyewitnesses placing Lester at the scene of a crime, no surveillance footage of the act itself, and most critically, no body to confirm that a murder had even taken place. All the evidence, as compelling as it seemed, remained circumstantial. One of the lead investigators on the case later expressed his frustration in an interview. Without a confirmed cause of death or a recovered body, the burden of proof was simply too high. As a result, no formal charges were filed. The case was reluctantly shelved. For several years, the investigation languished in limbo. Detectives continued to follow up on tips, and Paige's family clung to hope. Her loved ones, especially her children, were left without answers or closure, navigating a life filled with uncertainty and grief. Then, in an unexpected turn of events nearly 5 years later, the mystery took a major shift. In 2012, a hiker exploring a remote mountainside near the town of Delta stumbled upon something unusual among the rocks and dry brush. At first, he thought it was just discarded trash, but upon closer inspection, he realized he had found human. Alarmed, he quickly contacted local authorities. The area where the remains were found was particularly notable. It was not far from the road where Paige's personal belongings, including her checkbook, medical documents, and other items, had been discovered years earlier. Forensic teams were dispatched immediately. Suspicions were confirmed after a series of meticulous forensic tests. It was Paige. Lester wasn't arrested immediately. It would take another 2 years of careful preparation, new analysis, and strategic legal planning before charges were officially filed. In November 2014, Lester was formally arrested and charged with kidnapping, first-degree premeditated homicide, and second-degree murder. The charges represented years of work and a renewed commitment to securing justice, but the legal process was far from over. It wasn't until July 2016 that the trial finally began. The prosecution alleged that Lester's motive stemmed from a toxic mix of entitlement, obsession, and anger. According to them, Lester had become upset after being unable to schedule a follow-up appointment with Paige. One of the key witnesses during the trial was Lester's ex-wife, Lisa, who testified to his past behavior and volatile temperament. She described an earlier incident that revealed Lester's capacity for retaliation. According to Lisa, After their relationship ended, Lester had not accepted her decision to move on. He tracked her and her new partner down, confronted them aggressively, and eventually assaulted her. She was able to escape and filed a report with local authorities. One final piece of testimony came from Lester's current wife, who also took the stand. Initially, it was believed she might offer an alibi, but her testimony took an unexpected turn. When prosecutors showed her the surveillance footage from the supermarket where the disposable phone had been purchased, the same phone that was later linked to Lester's attempts to contact Paige, she identified her husband in the video, though Lester had denied being the person captured on the security cameras. His own wife recognized him. On September 9, 2016, after weeks of tense courtroom proceedings, impassioned testimonies, and meticulous presentations of evidence, the jury in the case against Lester returned to the courtroom without a consensus. Despite the time and effort invested in the trial, they were unable to reach a unanimous verdict. As a result, the presiding judge had no choice but to declare a mistrial, a legal outcome that, while not an acquittal, meant the trial had effectively ended without resolution. Over the next several weeks, the prosecution team took a fresh look at the entire case file. They revisited every detail, every interview, every piece of surveillance footage, every technical report. The goal was to ensure that no aspect of the case had been overlooked, and that the second trial would be even more compelling than the first. On November 21, 2016, Lester once again stood before a judge and jury to face the charges brought against him. The video, captured by cameras near the RV repair shop where Lester worked, showed a white Chevrolet vehicle circling the area where Paige regularly parked her car. The white vehicle, investigators confirmed, was registered to Lester's wife, who notably had been out of town during that period. Prosecutors argued that this allowed Lester to use the car without raising suspicion. One particularly telling moment of the trial came when new testimony was introduced regarding the night Paige went missing. According to his wife's statement, Lester left their home for approximately an hour that evening. When asked about it later, he claimed that he had forgotten to turn off the lights at his workshop and had driven back to check. But the timing of his unexplained absence aligned almost precisely with the suspected time frame of Paige's disappearance, further deepening investigators' concerns. On December 2, 2016, the courtroom heard the final statements from the prosecution and defense, each urging the jury to weigh the evidence carefully and to consider the consequences of their decision. Weeks later, on December 27, just as the year was drawing to a close, the verdict was announced. Lester was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, and other related charges in connection to Paige's death. Though Lester continued to deny any involvement, never admitting guilt or explaining his actions, the sentence was clear and unambiguous. The judge, emphasizing the severity of the crime and its lasting impact on the victim's loved ones, sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Still, Lester chose to file an appeal, asserting that legal errors had occurred during the trial and that the verdict should be reconsidered. In June 2022, the appellate court issued its ruling. The three-judge panel upheld the original verdict, stating that the trial had been conducted fairly and that the evidence presented was sufficient to support the jury's decision.